My name is Jessie. I'm part of a group of enabled warriors that you've probably never heard of. We're fighting back against our invisible illness and taking the dis out of disability. We don't give sympathy to our symptoms. They enable us to be the warrior that we are. If you ask doctors and nurses, they'd say what we're doing is impossible. But pushing the limits of our conditions is something that we have to break through every single day. So we push the limits. We are mentally strong, and we can do anything. The question is, how far can we push those limits? This podcast will give you the answers. I'm Jessie Ace, and this is the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Hey Warriors, thanks for joining me for another episode of the Disabled to Enabled podcast with me, your host, Jessie Ace. Today's episode is sponsored by our friends at Beekeepers Naturals, natural health products created by bees. Their products are so good that I've not had a cold the entire winter. Did you know that without bees, we'd have no coffee? Crazy. Check out mmini.me/bees and use code WARRIOR for 10% off today, or click the link in the show notes. By clicking this link, by the way, Beekeepers Naturals will give back to the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Enabled Warriors, our next guest on the show has been living with type 1 diabetes since 2006 and has been obsessed with keeping medications at the right temperature ever since. He says he is an entrepreneur by accident. I love that. Type 1 diabetes was an unwanted guest in his family for years, with his younger brother also being affected by it. It then hit him and he became pancreatically challenged. I love that term that you've coined there. That's really awesome. He landed in the ER after his refrigerator froze his insulin, and since then he has made it his mission to prevent that from ever happening again. Now his solution supports more than 600 temperature-sensitive medications that go beyond diabetes, includes MS, RA, and a lot of rare diseases. Enabled Warriors, I'm so honoured that he's here today. Please help me in welcoming the fabulous Amin, founder of MedAngel, everybody. Woo! Hey, how you doing?
Hi, Jessie. Thanks for having me.
Oh, huge welcome to the show. It's amazing having you here today. How you doing? You all good?
Yeah, very good. Thanks a lot. And yourself?
Awesome. Yeah, cool. Thanks. So let's get straight into our first part of our interview with Amin today. So this section focuses on his diabetes diagnosis, and then keep listening out for part 2 to find out what happened when his refrigerator froze the medication that he's dependent on. I can't even imagine the pressure that must. Oh my gosh. And find out why that encouraged him into entrepreneurship. And then we'll have some questions from our Enabled Warriors Facebook group. And then in part 3, listen out for Amin's answers to the super quick secrets round. Okay, let's get straight into part 1, shall we? So let's have a chat about your diagnosis initially. So it seems to run in your family as well, doesn't it?
Yes, that's correct, unfortunately. So over the years, I also got to know many people who live with type 1 diabetes, and the diagnosis story is always very present. It's that one initial shock. In fact, many people remember it every year. In the diabetes space, we call it a dia-versary. So I remember mine very, very well. It was December 29, 2006. And the weeks before, I was getting more and more tired, losing weight, drinking tons of water, literally just drinking water and going to the bathroom. I lost maybe 16 kilos, and I ended up in a hospital bed. I have to be honest, I thought that day that I would die, I thought it was some kind of mysterious virus or infection, and then a couple of hours later, they ran blood tests, and the doctor came and told me that I'm in severe keto acidosis, and then that I definitely will have to live with type 1 diabetes for the rest of my life, which for me was quite a relief, because I thought it would be much, much worse. I thought I would die, and yeah, so that day was definitely one of the very, very present days in my memory. And I think it's peculiar that I found my diagnosis actually a good news. But I also met other people who were the second to be diagnosed with it in the family, and it's almost always the same. So it's kind of is relative somehow.
Interesting. So I actually don't know that much about diabetes. My knowledge kind of extends to a friend that I had when I was about 9. And so I'm really interested in learning more about diabetes today. It's going to be really interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about what diabetes really is for people listening who might not know?
Sure. So, well, I'm not a medical professional, and I know very little about the other forms of diabetes I don't live with. In fact, I feel like it's really still under research, because just recently we thought there were two types of diabetes, and officially, like since 2 or 3 years, we know that there are five types of diabetes.
Oh, wow.
But type 1 is definitely an autoimmune condition. This is when your body decides, hey, I don't like these insulin producing cells, the beta cells in the pancreas, and sends the white blood cells to attack them and eliminate them. And so your body doesn't produce insulin anymore. Insulin is a very important hormone that makes it possible for the cells in your body to take sugar, glucose, and to convert it to energy. Um, and and that is type 1 diabetes. So the regulation is no longer there. The pancreas doesn't do that job, and you find yourself in charge of keeping your blood glucose in balance 24/7. And some people choose to do it with an insulin pump or multiple daily injections, so with pens. But that is type 1 diabetes, basically.
Wow, that's crazy. So what was that like having to suddenly go on daily injections? I mean, you keep in control of your own glucose level as well. I mean, that's a lot to take on at quite a young age. So how old were you when you were diagnosed? Sorry.
I was 19, but my little brother was 3.
Oh
And
goodness.
only years
Oh.
later, I realized how traumatizing my little brother's diagnosis was for the whole
Mm.
family. Much, much more traumatizing than for myself,
Mm.
than my own diagnosis. And I have to say, it really sounds funny, but to me, it was like, oh, okay, so this is the thing that my family lived with for years, and it's not just my brother. Now I have to do it too. So it wasn't really a massive shock. It was I knew that some things would require extra planning, like traveling or physical activities. But I also have to say I feel extremely privileged to live in a country like Germany, where diabetes care is really, really great, and access to the latest drugs and devices is possible. But I know that there are other parts of the world where living with diabetes is much, much, much harder.
Mm.
So on a daily basis, yeah, so you measure your glucose and you take a few subcutaneous injections. It wasn't really a big problem.
No, I guess because it's almost familiar to you because it's all in your
Yes,
family already.
yes, by all
Your
means,
little brother,
absolutely.
does your little brother have to do injections every day and things?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
so
he
he
was kind of.
does that every day since he's 3.
Gosh. And how old is he now?
He's close to 30, so 27 years.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's quite a long time. It's crazy.
yeah.
So yeah, so I guess it was a kind of normally sort of thing. And you said that you switched to using an insulin pen rather than a syringe. Now I'm completely clueless. I don't really know the difference, if I'm honest.
No problem. So you,
Obviously.
you basically need to check your blood glucose at different times during the day, and to decide what is the dose of insulin I need to inject. And to that, there are a few ways to get insulin in your body, either with a syringe or with a pen, or with a pump. There are new insulins that are you can inhale. There is actually one you can inhale, but it remains very not very well spread. So it's basically three things: either a syringe with vials, or a pen, or a pump. And to me, switching from syringes to pens was really a game changer. The convenience was really important. Instead of carrying around a bunch of syringes and a vial with you, you just carry basically this. It's just a case with 2 pens and a bunch of needles. But then the other really pivotal moment was starting to use a continuous blood glucose monitor. So it's a little device that's sitting here on my arm, and that's measuring my blood glucose continuously. And that was, by all means, that was eye-opening, and it's a massive improvement for sure. But um, the the measuring and injecting part is not the hardest part for me. Living with diabetes, and I think most people who live with it will also agree. It's more like the emotional burden of it as a chronic condition, and you probably know what I mean. So when you live with something like this, it's really 24/7. You don't get a break, you don't get holidays, and it doesn't matter how much effort you put in it. The reward is basically just having a normal life. So you're literally investing a lot, and all you get is normal. And sometimes it can be haunting and draining for sure. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Gosh. So how do you kind of deal with that emotional sort of burden, do you think?
hmm So I think also talking with other peers, I think that of course we all have different personalities, and we all cope with things in different ways, and we all are triggered by different things. So I think it's really important to accept that it's really not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. It's an autoimmune condition. Like, you wake up one day and you have it. And I think it's extremely important to make your peace with that, and to accept it, and to be kind to yourself, and not be too hard on yourself, and just doing your best. And if your best is not enough, then you just, I don't know, you try more. For me, definitely my most important resource is peer support for sure. So I was very lucky to meet a few people in local groups here in Berlin, and then you see that I'm not in this alone, and then you can talk about things that you can talk with a medical team about. You can uh, there is a lot of empathy. You understand what you guys are going through, and you start to develop your little tactics and to know yourself better with the help of devices. And you realize, okay, if this is the thing that if I do, then I feel much better, and you start to include it in your daily routine. So should probably look for peers and for peer support, either on a local level or in the internet. For sure, I was definitely in at least in 2 occasions I faced diabetes-induced burnout. I never thought this would happen to me. I always had empathy for people who report it or talk about it online, but I never thought, this would happen to me. But it does.
So what was that kind of like?
And you're just doing your best. You're putting a lot of effort in it, and the results are not there. And you know that, in my case, I knew that the doctor I was seeing wouldn't listen, wouldn't understand what I would go through. And it was really important that one of the peers, one of my friends who also has diabetes, suggested, hey, you can change the practice. You can actually see another doctor. And it goes, yes, I can. Of course I can.
Yeah.
And then so this was one of the situations. And of course, you need sometimes someone to come say, hey man, it's not like you see it. It's not as you think. It's like, of course you're right. And so yeah, I don't think there is. I think that peer support and community support is as important as the clinical and medical interventions when it comes to chronic conditions, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Especially when, I mean, like, let's talk about how Do you know how many people diabetes impacts? I imagine it's
Yes.
quite a
Yeah.
few.
So as I said, there are a few types of diabetes,
Yeah.
and it is depending on the countries, you have a prevalence of between 6% and 25%, but 20-25% are exceptions. Like roughly, you could say that 10 to 12% of people in the world live with a form of diabetes, which makes it the largest chronic condition by numbers worldwide, and 1/10 of them have type 1. So it's really estimated maybe 60 million people worldwide live with type 1 diabetes.
That's crazy, isn't it? That's crazy.
Yeah, it's really the number one
Yeah.
condition worldwide.
And I think it's really important to kind of articulate as well that this is an autoimmune disease. Like there's a lot of talk about it being, um, like you're at risk of type 2 diabetes if you eat too many hamburgers and that sort of thing.
Yes.
But it is really important to say that it's not like that.
Absolutely, by all means. I think I don't, not only I think, but most people, most advocates and most organizations are convinced that diabetes has an image problem, and that's for a variety of reasons. But for sure, you have to have the wrong genes for it to happen. So it definitely has an image problem, and it definitely can be much better.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it gets better, and it's only going to get better if people like yourselves kind of start speaking up and sharing your story.
Yeah, but I literally I do almost nothing. There are amazing advocates out there who are doing a great work, and for example, advocating for the language we use when we talk about diabetes, the language we use when we talk about chronic conditions in general, so we can remove some of the stigma, and we can work through or work towards better standards of care.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one word that I see crop up quite a lot in regards to chronic illness, and that is the word suffering. I hate the word suffering. I really do.
You're right.
What's your take
You're
on it?
absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
What's your take on that? Well, how do you feel about the word suffering?
No, it's definitely not suffering. It's something you cope with, you live with, and that's it. That's it. If it's not that, it could be anything else. Like all adults, everyone has to deal with something. It could be a chronic condition. It could be another situation. So we just need to try our best and be kind to each other.
Totally. That's all the world needs. You're speaking my language. Okay, Enabled Warriors, that is it for part 1. In the next part, we will discuss the amazing things that Amin has done since his diagnosis. And Warriors, go and look out for part 2, comes later in the week. And if there's anything that we've spoken about so far that you can relate to, then please tell us in the comments, and remember to follow or subscribe wherever you're listening today. You even get bonus points if you leave a review. I'll speak to you soon, Amin. Thank you. Are you ready to fight back against your chronic illness and go from being disabled to enabled? Do you want to be an enabled warrior? Someone who is brave, strong, and confident, and someone who is ready to find a way to achieve awesome things despite a diagnosis. This is your invitation. Check out disabledtoenabled.com for articles and reviews to find out how you can become enabled too. If you think this podcast is better than sleeping in on Sundays, tickle that subscribe or follow button. Want to ask your questions to future guests? Make sure to share the episode with someone who needs some inspiration. Join the Enabled Warriors tribe on Facebook and look out for our question posts. Before we go, check out Disabled to Enabled on Instagram and stay enabled.